Presentation of dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho.
Coming up, what is public memory and how is it best preserved? A conversation with Dr. Brent Glass, Director Emeritus of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, about the changing and yet central role of museums, historic sites, and memorials in our culture. That's Dialogue next. Stay tuned. Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Marcia Franklin. We all have memories of important moments in our own lives, and certain world events are also seared in our minds, especially now that they're beamed around the globe. For instance, I distinctly remember gathering around a small black and white television set with my family in July 1969 as astronauts first landed on the moon. 17 years later, I would turn on another set, also black and white by the way, and hear Tom Brokaw announce that the Space Shuttle Challenger had exploded, killing the crew, including teacher Krista McAuliffe. Flash forward another 21 years as I held my breath and watched in person as the Space Shuttle Endeavour, with astronaut and Idaho teacher Barbara Morgan on board, rocketed into the atmosphere, completing McAuliffe's dream. Now, memories like that used to be just the stuff of dinner table conversations or family oral histories. But now museums and other history keepers are increasingly involving the public in their exhibits. It's a fine balance, though, between scholarship and crowdsourcing. Here to talk about that and other trends in preserving public history is Brent Glass. Dr. Glass is a historian and Director Emeritus of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History, during which he oversaw an $85 million renovation of the iconic museum in Washington, D.C. Prior to taking that job, Dr. Glass was the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Museum and Historical Commission. He was also a member of the Flight 93 Advisory Commission, which helped design a memorial to the people on that plane, which crashed in Pennsylvania after being hijacked on September 11, 2001. Now, Dr. Glass is in Boise as the keynote speaker at Idaho's Heritage Conference, sponsored by Preservation Idaho. Welcome to Idaho.
Thank you. It's nice to be here.
Have you been here much?
I've been here before, many years ago, but this is my first time in Boise in maybe over a decade.
Great.
So it's great to be here.
Yeah,
yes.
And I understand you got the opportunity to drive to Minidoka.
I did. I arrived yesterday and was able to take a long drive through the high desert to see that historic site, which was quite remarkable. It's quite a
former internment camp for Japanese.
13,000 Japanese who came from Alaska and Washington and Oregon in 1942 and stayed there for more than 3 years and really made endured a very harsh environment and made a life and a community there.
What was that like for you to be out there?
Well, it was powerful in sort of a poetic way, because there's not that much in the way of above ground structures to see, but there is some wonderful a walking trail with some displays along the way that explain when you're looking at an open field, that you can find out what was there during the war. And
there's a new book out, which is wonderful, and written in part by Professor Todd Shallett here at Boise State University. Mm-hmm. When you're a consultant now, when you walk around sites like that,
yes.
Do you walk around with the idea of, this could be improved here, or this could be changed here, or brought to life?
Even when I was a director at the Smithsonian,
right,
or working in Pennsylvania, I developed a critical eye. But I also am very appreciative of the challenges of having to tell a story when a visitor comes who may have an hour or a half hour and doesn't have a chance or maybe would be inspired to read a book like the one you just mentioned. But a museum or a memorial is not a book. And so it's a different kind of communication medium. And so I appreciate the effort that is evident at a place like Minidoka.
But probably not many people know about that. Maybe more signage needed or something to bring it up into the public's...
I think there could be better signage along the highway to say, turn here, you're going to, since it is a National Historic Site. So I was struck by the lack of visibility. But I understand it's a relatively new park. that they have the visitor center in Hagerman, I believe. And,
Hagerman, yeah.
So that will eventually their plan is to move a visitor center there, and then it requires a feeling of local ownership, so that the people can be comfortable with the fact that this is an unpleasant story in many cases. Although in the end, and I think it's wonderful that they've reconstructed the honor roll, the sign that was placed there in 1943, which has a list of all the people who were interned at Minidoka who then served in the military. And I forget the number, but several of them lost their lives.
These are the kinds of stories, aren't they, that are more and more becoming part of public history.
Yes.
The untold stories maybe of people who weren't as powerful. When we grew up,
right.
We heard history through the lens, or we saw it through the lens of military
yes.
commanders and the people that wrote the history.
Yeah. Well, I think history is not inevitable. You know, it happens because people make decisions about their lives or about issues in their lives. And I think historians have become much more skillful in assembling evidence and reconstructing the past using not only the official written records, but also the material culture, the buildings, the archaeological sites,
diaries.
the diaries, the costumes, the furniture, and then also the oral histories. And putting that evidence together, the oral evidence, the written evidence, and the physical evidence to tell these stories.
So some place like Minidoka wouldn't necessarily be in the public memory, would it? Would that, it's larger events like September 11th that are part of the public memory,
Yeah.
or not?
Well, I think if you're telling the story of Pearl Harbor, for example, which is still in the public memory, although maybe not quite as vividly as it was in the 40s or 50s, but the aftermath of Pearl Harbor, one of the results were the relocation.
So you can take a story like this and wrap it into something that is more
yes,
public memory.
Because I think people have to understand, well, why were they there? What was the background? And unless you understand the connection, and that's what we have to do a lot in our field, is make connections between a public event like Pearl Harbor and then all the ways it's connected to other stories.
So how would you define public memory?
I think public memory is maybe the intersection of academic research with popular storytelling, and often those are not consistent. And I always refer to myself as a translator, translating academic language into a public language, and it takes negotiation and takes sometimes compromise, because telling the story from an academic point of view sometimes is not that interesting or that engaging. And so we have to find ways, not only through exhibitions and a traditional display of objects, but through music and theater and film and first-person experiences, and as much as possible use experiential learning as a way of getting the audience to appreciate the story you're trying to tell.
That's often called living history sometimes, experiential.
Exactly.
And
yes. Role-playing.
There's an
yes.
example of that at the museum that you were the director of, where you
yes.
have some seats from the lunch counter
yes.
at Woolworths where the sit-in occurred.
Yes.
And there are ways that the public is involved in trying to feel what that
yes,
felt like.
we around the lunch counter we have arranged a theatrical production, a theater experience, so it runs about 20 minutes, in which we invite volunteers from the audience to sit in. But we're using a training manual on nonviolent protest, which was from the 1960s. Yes. And we invite these visitors to take a seat, not at the lunch counter itself, but right in front of the lunch counter, and for the rest of the audience to role play a intimidation.
Right.
Not with any physical harm.
No, they get yelled at.
Yes, and so that experience gives them a brief encounter with what it might have been like to be a student. These people who sat in at Greensboro and many other places were college students, and some of the fear that they might have felt, and some of the determination that they might have felt to exercise their basic rights as Americans.
And this is one of the ways that the public is being brought into exhibits.
Yes. And it's meaningful because I remember one young boy raising his hand during the question and answer session, and he said, "Did this really happen?" And it brought it home to us that for many generations of people, Americans and international visitors, and at the Smithsonian we have many, many people from other countries coming to the museum. This is ancient history, the 1960s, for many of them.
Well, it's why so many Holocaust victims, or survivors rather, gave their testimony to, because they won't be around, and some people might not believe it happened. But there's a fine line here, though, because you can have this role-playing going on, and the actual people that experience this might get offended, or you know, pretending to be Indians or pretending to be African Americans. It's their history.
Yes.
So there's a fine line, isn't there, between with this role-playing?
Yeah, I think it's really important to include the community that you're talking about.
Right.
And that's why I think the kind of collections that we assemble really has to start with the people from that community. When we have naturalization ceremonies at the American History Museum, and we invite the people who are taking the oath of citizenship to voluntarily give us something from their experience.
To put in the collection?
To put in the collection.
Nice.
Because we have a collection on immigration. Well, this keeps the collection fresh. And we had one woman who gave us the dress that she wore when she left Cuba as a 7-year-old girl. And her mother, they were only allowed to take one dress and one doll. And she gave us her dress, which her mother had made and which they had saved. And obviously it was something important to her.
You know,
so that's something that is associated with that experience. You can't go wrong when you say we want to have something of your experience.
Objects, in the end, mean so much, don't they? I mean, you can have video, you can have role-playing, this living history, but in the end, that object tells a story. And, you know, Antiques Roadshow on PBS is so popular because people want to know the stories behind those objects. They want to tell the stories behind those
I think storytelling is as old as human beings, as old as civilization. And it's a great way to involve the public by saying this isn't just the top hat, this isn't just Lincoln's top hat, this is the top hat that he wore to Ford's Theater the night he was assassinated. And then that leads you into the story of what was going on in the country at that moment. The war had just ended. Who was John Wilkes Booth? What was the environment? What was the context in which that hat plays a supporting role, but is a survivor, in effect, a witness, a three-dimensional witness to a very significant moment in our history.
There's even a little dog in one of your transportation exhibits that was a dog that got picked up on a cross-country trip in Idaho.
Yes.
And they put little
goggles
on it, and the kids are fascinated by that.
Yes, I'm blanking on the name of the dog, but the dog, was a song written about the dog, and it became the mascot of this first cross-country trip
in a car
from San Francisco to New York.
Those objects have a certain magic to them, and here in Idaho there's a great exhibit, Idaho 150, with 150 objects that typify Idaho, including some very poignant things like the door from the Ruby Ridge incident with the bullet hole in it, or the robe of a Aryan Nations member. You know, these are hard. You know, you have to see the dark side of history as well. You have to show it all.
But I think that we often self-censor, and we underestimate the audience's capacity for complexity and for ambiguity, and for the fact that we as historians argue with each other. And the public, I think, likes to hear that there are not, some of these issues are not settled, that we're still learning more, and we're still influenced very much by, and I think this is where public memory is fascinating to study. We're influenced as much by our own times as we look at the past, and that shapes our perspective as much as the evidence itself that we're examining.
Sure, a television report or a photo, you start to think, well, do I remember it from the television report, or public memory in some senses is enhanced by television, but also clouded by it at the same time.
Well, I think there was a study done in the 1990s about trustworthiness of sources. And it turned out that, and this was with regard to American history, museums had a very high ranking of trustworthiness. Television, not so much, at least the television news. Newspapers were not as trusted. Your grandparents had more trustworthiness about the past than some of these other sources. But museums ranked very high in that survey. And that's because I think when someone sees something in a museum, first of all, it's real. And second of all, I think they feel it's being presented unfiltered. Now, that's not exactly true, but I think we really strive in a museum for balance and for fairness in the way we present the past.
And you had some exhibits that covered controversial topics in the Smithsonian, where you had to show both sides. You read every label, as I
well, the
understand
military
it.
history, we opened a large military history exhibit in 2004, and I felt it was important that we look at America's military history from many perspectives. And I was anticipating that there were at least 5 areas that I called hot button areas: the Civil War, the Indian Wars, the decision to drop the atomic bomb, the Vietnam War, and the war in Iraq and Afghanistan. And we consulted with veterans groups, with scholars, with teachers. We did some focus group activities.
Again, this is a way of bringing the public into these exhibits that weren't brought in before. It was just some people in a back room that made the exhibit.
We shared authority with.
That's what it's called, right? Shared authority.
With these advisory groups. In the end, it was our decision about what to include or how to present, but it helped us. And I remember one teacher saying to us, after we had presented our design and our conceptual ideas about 1/3 through the planning process, and one of the teachers said, "Don't sugarcoat war. Tell us what really happens. Don't try to make it. Don't celebrate it. Don't try to make it too glorious. Show the results of war. Our students see it on TV every day. Show how it played out in American history."
What is happening to historical literacy in our country right now?
Well, it's a great question. It's hard to quantify whether people know more than they did 50 years ago. I don't believe in a golden age of historical knowledge. I think that when we were growing up, let's say in the 50s or 60s or 70s, and we loved history, it was a different kind of history we were presented. It was a very straight, sort of narrow narrative from a single perspective. And by expanding the stage and bringing more players onto the stage and more voices, more ethnic groups, women, the perspective of women, the perspective of gays on our history, it makes it a little more complicated and makes it maybe harder to quantify what people know or what they're
But I know you're concerned, right, that people aren't studying history as much as they used to.
Well, I'm concerned about how history has been marginalized in the curriculum, and I think that's a big mistake, because you can't be a citizen in a democracy unless you have some sense of your own history. And a democracy can't survive without citizens who know their history. And we can just look at what happens to history in totalitarian countries. The first thing that happens when there's a military coup or there's a dictator is they close the archives, or they close the museums, or they tear down the memorials, because public memory, burn the books. Public memory is very powerful, and controlling public memory is very meaningful to totalitarian countries. So, with that example in mind, if we don't expose students to our history, and they can't know what they don't love. They can't love what they don't know, excuse me. And so they're not going to love this country and love our history unless they know it.
Another reason to make it more interactive, potentially more interesting, bring people in. I know
Yes.
you run the Stephen Colbert show.
Yes.
I mean, anything to get people interested in the museum and
Yes,
coming
that
to the
was fun.
museum. He wanted to donate a portrait of himself.
Yes. But in the process of rejecting his portrait at first, we went and visited all the objects that were on display in our Treasures of American History exhibit, and I had a chance to explain to him why his portrait didn't measure up to
Ultimately,
those
you
objects.
capitulated, though.
We capitulated, but we took a year. We drew it out for a year.
That was fun, huh?
It was fun, and it was important to be accessible and demystify what we do in the museum, because for some people it's something that is very stodgy and distant.
Right.
And I think we have a job to be in public, talk about the issues we're trying to deal with in selecting objects for display, what stories we tell. I think that's important.
You can't do that without money, and funding is always an issue.
Yes.
The Smithsonian is free.
Yes.
And government funded, but also has private donations. Talk to me about the potential conflicts of interest that can come up. You get a whole bunch of money from somebody who wants to have an exhibit on their family or their industry.
Yes.
And they want
a good example.
Done a certain way.
We have a policy at the Smithsonian that what is displayed and what is written on a label is a curatorial decision. We will take advice and we will take suggestions, whether it's from a donor or from someone else. But in the end, that decision is the curator's decision, and the director has a role to play.
What if they say, the person or individual or company says, we'll give you, $7-10 million to do this exhibit, and you actually don't even really feel it's worth
we wouldn't
doing.
Do it.
You wouldn't do it.
No. We wanted to do a exhibit. We wanted to renovate our Hall of Transportation at the museum, which had some wonderful objects but was somewhat dated, and we wanted to combine actually 3 different galleries into a single story of transportation. And we went to General Motors as one of our donors, and they were the lead donor. But from the beginning, they were really very clear and followed that principle, that we were going to talk about things such as auto safety, that we were going to talk about the competition between railroads and automobiles, and that we were going to display cars that were not made by General Motors. And they were fine with that. They really were fine with it.
The time goes so quickly. We're starting to wrap up here. It must have been an amazing job, the one that you had as director of the Museum of American History.
It was great.
You came in at a time when there was a report that had just come out that was critical of the museum. You oversaw an $85 million renovation. When you look at what you did, what are you most proud of?
Well, 2 things, I think. One was we adopted a master plan for the museum, the first one in its history. And that doesn't sound very exciting.
Sexy, yeah.
But it really has allowed us to raise money, first of all, because people saw what we were trying to create. And it set up a framework for making decisions about organizing this very large facility. Second, I think what we called shining new light on American history, trying to present the content of American history in a new way, using theater, using some other techniques other than traditional exhibit displays. And third, I think, trying to be more inspirational. We have the flag, we have the Star-Spangled Banner, and we now display the Star-Spangled Banner in a way that I think is very moving. And we also have
horizontally instead of vertically.
Right. We present it on a table rather than hanging from the wall. But that's for conservation reasons. But we also it allows the visitor to become closer to the flag. But finally, we have an activity every day, especially in the summer, where we have a full-size replica of the flag. And people unfold. We invite our visitors to unfold the flag in our public square, which is a new feature of the museum, and they sing the Star-Spangled Banner. And they stand there, and people come to Washington for that patriotic experience. And they will never forget that moment. And so that's something that I'm proud that we were able to organize the museum and renovate it in a way that people feel really engaged and inspired by their history.
And it's perhaps unfair to ask you with so little time left, but what was the experience of working on the Flight 93 commission or the memorial like? I know there was some controversy at first about the design, but ultimately it came through.
Well, I think that story of Flight 93 is another story that the memorial reflects, I think, the sacrifice, first of all, of the passengers and crew. I'm involved also in the advising the Park Service on an interpretive center, a visitor center that will go into construction later this year. The memorial is completed. But that story of Flight 93 is amazing because in 20 minutes, those passengers and crew members formed a meeting house in the sky. They organized themselves. They knew that their lives were in danger. They formed a little government and took a vote. And then they formed a small army and took action. And that story is the one we try to tell there. And the memorial is a very meaningful expression of that citizen action and that democracy as it played out on that day.
What was it like helping with that?
Well, it was a great experience because I was working with the families, the family members, with the National Park Service, who were very professional and really excellent, with some local officials who just, through no choice of their own, now had this responsibility to create this memorial. So
Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Right?
Shanksville, Pennsylvania, Somerset County. And I knew many of these people because of my work in Pennsylvania. So that was one of the great professional and personal experiences I've ever had.
What's next for you? You're writing a book, right, in between your consultations and speeches?
Right. I'm doing work for different museums around the country at the Presidio in San Francisco, and doing some work in Virginia with the Museum of Shenandoah Valley, and several other, Gunston Hall and several other museums, Erie Maritime Museum in Pennsylvania. But I'm also writing a book on 50 places in America that reflect our national identity.
Any in Idaho?
Minidoka will be one of them.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah.
Yeah, great. When will we see that?
I hope next year, but
2014?
Yes, I hope so. But we'll see Simon & Schuster as the publisher, and once I get it right and get all the essays in and stop traveling and start writing, I think we'll get it published.
So one per state then?
No, it's not one per state. Some states will have more than one entry, and the National Mall in Washington will be one of those sites.
Great. Well, I'll look forward to reading that book for sure.
And I'll love to come back and talk to you about it.
Wonderful. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have, unfortunately. You've been listening to Brent Glass. He's Director Emeritus of the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. For more information, check out our website. Just go to idahoptv.org and click on Dialogue. For Dialogue, I'm Marcia Franklin. Thanks for tuning in.
Presentation of Dialogue on Idaho Public Television is made possible through the generous support of the Laura Moore Cunningham Foundation, committed to fulfilling the Moore family's legacy of building the great state of Idaho. Check out our website, become a friend on Facebook, or follow us on Twitter.